Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first of three public meetings organised through the Zoom medium or Facebook this evening at 7 o'clock. My name is Vince DiPietro and I'm most recently the Recovery Coordinator for the Shoalhaven, and I'm very excited to be able to run these three sessions today with very important panellists who can actually inform the community as best as possible in readiness for the coming fire season. Now, we've been through a lot together in the last 12 months and it hasn't let up. There's still an awful long way to go. But one thing we're able to do is, with the assistance of this technology, is rather than community meetings in separate locations, is we can reach out to as many people as possible across three separate sessions, and hopefully we'll capture the questions and concerns of people as accurately as we possibly can. Those that we can't answer live during the session, we'll make sure we get answers posted on through the Shoalhaven City Council website. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional peoples of the land on which we meet today and across all the locations on which we're meeting within all parts of the Shoalhaven, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are also participating online today. I'd also like to acknowledge, very importantly, the impact that the recent bushfires and flood and continuing emergency residual effects have had on the Indigenous community, their well-being, to their culture and their history within the Shoalhaven, as it has directly impacted upon their lands. Without further ado, I would like to please invite Mayor Amanda Finley to officially welcome participants. Over to you, Amanda.
Thanks, Vince, and thank you for the fantastic work that you've been doing on behalf of our Shoalhaven over the last 9 months and helping to guide us through that recovery project. And welcome to all of you that are here today, a beautiful Shoalhaven day to welcome you to this live event. I'm sure that you'll be very pleased with the panel that we have put together for you today, and welcome along with me, apart from Vince, we have Ray Steins, who's our local emergency controller. We have Mark Williams from the RFS, Stephen Dunshea, our CEO from Shoalhaven City Council, Warren Goodall, who's our Regional Emergency Manager Officer, Kim White, our Local Emergency Management Officer, and Bronwyn from New South Wales Health. And I'm really pleased that everyone's been able to bring forward this important message to you today, because if you're like me, the thought of facing another fire season so quickly after the last one, it certainly doesn't feel like 12 months since we last got ready and were prepared. The one big message that I have for you today is please listen tightly to this. If it's causing you problems and you're feeling that there's issues rising from this, please switch off and come back. We will tape this so that you can come back at a later time when you feel more comfortable. But remember that the number one thing that you can do to get ready this year is to do your fire plan. Please do your fire plan, but that'll be reiterated over the course of the day. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you very much, Amanda. And it's really important to understand the linkages that we've established and really reinforced over the recovery period. One of them, very importantly, has been the New South Wales Government Health Agencies. And we're lucky today to have Bronwyn Lunt from New South Wales Health, to speak about health and wellbeing. Over to you, please, Bronwyn.
Thanks, Vince. As Vince said, I'm working for New South Wales Health as a mental health bushfire recovery coordinator for the Shoalhaven. And today I simply want to emphasise the need for us to pay attention to our self-care, both as we navigate our way forward and today during this session. As we go through today's session, you might find that it brings up some uncomfortable feelings and memories. Please take care of yourself. If you start to feel at all overwhelmed, take a break, step aside, and maybe take a moment to breathe. Or as Amanda has just said, please feel free to turn the presentation off altogether. These sessions and all the information from today will be available on the council website, so you can come back to it when you feel ready or when you've got somebody supportive with you, if that helps. As a result of these fires, some of us are probably going through the toughest experiences of our lives and experiencing really intense emotions. So it's really important to take time out to replenish your energies, to refill your bucket if you like, which means putting the focus back on yourself. Now that's going to look different for everybody, but there's some common elements that we know boost our well-being, that help us to refuel so we can tackle what life throws at us. So try to have regular contact with other people who make you feel good. That might be for somebody joining a social group, or others it might just be having family and friends around that you can shoot the breeze with. We know that regular physical activity is beneficial for us, both for our bodies and our brains. And that might be making a commitment to taking the dog for a walk every day, or going for a swim, or playing a sport. But perhaps most importantly, just spend some time regularly doing something that you really enjoy, that isn't fire related, or flood related, or any other of our crises at the moment. Initially, you might have got through on adrenaline, on willpower, sheer grit and determination. That's the sort of thing that worked in the beginning, but we can't do that for forever without paying attention to our self-care before it starts to take a toll on us physically and mentally and psychologically. As time goes on, you might notice some things for yourself. You might notice that you're feeling more run down or fatigued, maybe not sleeping as well as you normally do, or getting more health complaints, more colds. You might notice that your moods aren't as easy to control, or that you respond to things with emotions that are probably out of character for you. You might be worried about things that never used to concern you, or worried about the future. And also it can be hard to concentrate and think clearly. You might have difficulty focusing or remembering things. They're really normal responses, but they're also signs that your mind and your body are under stress. So if you notice those changes hanging around or becoming more frequent, or if they're interfering with your ability to do what you normally do in your day, then it's worth seeking out some support. You don't have to cope with it on your own. It can be helpful to get support from a counsellor or a health professional, just to work out what's going on for you and to develop some strategies that might work for you. All the support lines and the services that are shown on the slides, they're all free and they bulk bill, or you could just give us a call. There's myself and my colleague. It really doesn't matter how big or small your issue is. We're happy to listen and assist, and we can talk through options together. We can simply try to put your mind at ease about some things, or we can give more detailed and individualised assistance. And we can connect with other supports as well. So if in doubt, feel free to give us a call. But as we move forward and move on to the next presentations and move through this presentation, I'd like you just to take a moment at home or wherever you are, just to breathe and just to arrive for today's session. And after a few deep breaths, I want you just to take care of yourself through the session. Keep track of where you're going and how you're feeling. Feel free to turn off if you need to. And just remember to take care of yourself now and into the future. Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much, Bronwyn. Really timely advice, and I know that there'll be a lot of folks that will benefit from it. We now move forward into the presentation proper, and it's very appropriate that the first panelist on today's session is not only the Chief Executive Officer of the Shoalhaven City Council, but very importantly for this session, he's also the Chair of the Local Emergency Management Committee. So over to you, please, Stephen.
Look, thanks very much for that, Vince. Really appreciate that. Can I also pass on my thanks to yourself, Vince, for the outstanding work that you did in helping the Shoalhaven through the recovery phase of the devastating Currawong fire. As we said at the time, it was a beast of a fire, and to respond to that and to recover from that, we needed some significant assistance from right across a whole range of agencies. And I have to say, as CEO of the council, it was very comforting to know that I had you working alongside me through that recovery phase. So a public thank you for your help, Vince. But my presentation today, the first point I want to make is that I think we all have to accept that it's inevitable that emergencies will happen. These things will happen. And as we all know, they can, and as we've seen, they do have a significant social, economic, and environmental impact across the areas affected. We saw that through the Currawong fire. Just on that last season's bushfire, we've got the recent flood events, the wind events, and of course we're still in the midst of the global coronavirus crisis. And all these things emphasise the need for all of us to have prepared appropriate and effective prevention, preparation, response and recovery strategies and plans in place for these emergency situations. And we need that right across our local government area, and we need it within all our local communities. So in that regard, Shoalhaven City Council works in partnership with the emergency services, with state and federal government agencies, with charities and other support agencies to help our community through the recovery phase of those emergencies, as we have just done and continuing to do. Similarly, we work with these agencies to prepare for future emergencies, including what we know is the coming next bushfire season. And that work that we're doing in preparing for is part of what we're here for today, is helping our community, communicating with our community as we prepare for the pending bushfire season. So as CEO / General Manager of the Council, one of my roles is to chair, as Vince referred to, is the Local Emergency Management Committee. And that Emergency Management Committee, its role is to prepare, as we said before, to prepare, respond to, or have strategies in place to respond to those emergencies. And so it's made up of a number of agencies. The emergency services membership of that are the Rural Fire Services, Fire and Rescue New South Wales, the State Emergency Services, Ambulance, Police, Surf Life Saving Australia, the Defence, Marine Rescue, the Local Emergency Management Officer, Kim White, as Vince introduced earlier, the REMO, or the Regional Emergency Management Officer, and Warren Goodall's here with us today, is the REMO. The LEOCON is the Local Emergency Operations Controller, represented here today by Ray Steins, Inspector Ray Steins from New South Wales Police is with us. There's a range of supporting agencies as well, the Illawarra Shoalhaven Local Health, the Environmental Protection Authority, a range of utilities, Transport for New South Wales, Local Land Services, Engineering Services, Welfare Services, National Parks, Shoalhaven Water. Most importantly, or very importantly, is ABC Media, and they were very efficient and very effective through the Currowan fire. A range of telecommunication services, and Jervis Bay Territory are also represented on that Local Emergency Management Committee. Next slide, please. There's the next slide. Okay. Shoalhaven Council has a role, as I said. Our role in that is to support the members of that committee. So, as I said, as the CEO of Council, I chair that committee. The committee meets on a quarterly basis. I think that's important to realise, whether there's a misconception that the Local Emergency Management Committee actually runs the emergency situations from the Emergency Operations Centre during emergencies. That's not the case. It's the role of the combat agencies to run the emergency, and under the leadership of the LEOCON. So Council's role in that is to support, as I said, and we support that through a range of services in that Emergency Operations Centre. We'll have representatives from Shoalhaven Water, looking at water and sewer impacts, managing transport, logistics matters, engineering services, environmental services, and extremely importantly, the media and communication aspects, to make sure messages are getting out there as quickly as possible through a range of media opportunities. So the other role of the Local Emergency Management Committee, as I said, meeting quarterly, is to, it has responsibility for preparing what's called the Local Emergency Management Plan, or the M Plan. So that plan records what are the agreed arrangements for the control of emergency situations and for coordinating the resources that are needed during emergency situations. The M Plan is a public document and is available for viewing on Council's website, should you wish to go and have a look. The preparation of the M Plan is based on a number of principles. Firstly, that responsibility, and it's important to note, the responsibility for preparing, response and recovery in relation to emergencies rests initially at the local level. Secondly, that the control of emergencies, the response and recovery operations, is conducted at the lowest effective level, those on the ground best placed to deal with that emergency. And that makes sense. As I said before, it's not the Local Emergency Management Committee's role to manage the emergencies. The emergencies are managed by the appropriate agency, and that's that principle, that it's the lowest effective level that is responsible for dealing with that emergency. The Local Emergency Operations Controller, or the LEOCON, as I mentioned earlier, and Ray Steins is here with us today, is responsible when requested by a combat agency to coordinate the provision of resources and the support needed to deal with that emergency situation. The emergency preparation, response and recovery operations should be conducted with all agencies carrying out their normal functions wherever possible. And also another principle in relation to that M Plan is that prevention measures remain the responsibility of the authority or the agencies charged by statute with that responsibility. So, as I said, Shoalhaven City Council has many responsibilities under the 4 phases of the emergency, those 4 phases being planning, response, prevention and recovery. And as I said, Council's specific responsibilities include the engineering services, water, sewer, transport, media, environment, communications, and transport services, as I already said. And also, a key role that Council undertakes in those emergency situations is to facilitate the full or partial activation of an emergency evacuation centre or evacuation centres, if needed. And in doing so, Council follows the Shoalhaven Emergency Operations Centre standard operating procedures. And in this regard, Council supports the Local Emergency Operations Controller and in accordance with the New South Wales Emergency Operations Centre policy. Is there another slide? I think that's it from me, Vince, at this point in time. Sorry, Vince, you're on mute.
Okay, it's just cost me quite a sizable sum of money, that, because I was pleading with everybody to not be caught out. What you've just heard about is the organisational aspects of the committee and the planning level. I wanted to take a few moments of video time of this webinar to be able to share with my fellow residents of the Shoalhaven a fantastic facility which we have all contributed to as ratepayers, and is quite unique in most, if not all, local government areas around us. And that is the local Integrated Emergency Management Centre in Albatross Road in Nowra here. The reason I think the video is important is because it's valuable for every member of the community to see where these operations come together and how the various personalities the various panellists that you're hearing today where it is that they actually go to for most of their waking hours in any emergency when the centre is activated. So if we could perhaps play that video, please.
Good morning, Bradley Stewart, Royal Fire Service. This is the Shoalhaven Fire Control Centre. This is where the incident management team is working from to support the ongoing fires here in the Batemans Bay, Shoalhaven area. This is the logistics cell in here, so we've got volunteers and agency representatives assisting with taking phone calls and answering messages, also coordinating resources such as fire units, strike teams, firefighters, aircraft, hotel bookings and food. This is our operations section. So this is where the operations team are coordinating the resources that are moving around the fireground, including aircraft. This is our fire behaviour analysts. So they look at the weather, they look at the fuel availability, they look at the topography, they make predictions as to the rate of spread around the community. We have national parks people here assisting with the coordination of planning. So we have a planning team here. So they're looking 4 or 5 days in advance as to what we can do to bring this fire to a successful resolution. We have specialist GIS mapping operators here, so they're trying to do all the mapping and keep it up to date. That flows on to our firefighters, but also to the public through Fires Near Me, etc. They get to see the extent and the scale of the fire. Down here we have our radio communication section, so they communicate with the resources that are in the field. So we push information to them and we pull information back as required, and we use that to help obviously inform the community for our community messaging. This is the community liaison team, so the role is to take phone calls and assist members of the public. This section here is our aviation section. They're not too busy at the moment because the aviation resources haven't launched just yet, so they're out doing some briefings. So we've got up to 12 aircraft available to us at the moment, including the large air tanker as required. Okay, so this is the Emergency Operations Centre where we have all of our support agencies across New South Wales, so Department of Health, Police, Local Council, SES, we have RMS, and they're supporting the ongoing operation here and helping to keep the community safe. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, and I think that's a good segue. Before I do pass over to Mark Williams from the RFS, we've just had one of the participants in the webinar asking if we're actually going to get down to speaking about what individuals can do to prepare. The answer to that is absolutely yes. The reason we're working through this from the top down is because this is about getting ready, looking through the windscreen, and if we can build a picture of what's available in the Shoalhaven and what residents can actually be confident is working behind the scenes, that is a big part of the, I think, of the psychology of just making people more able to manage what might be coming at us from left or right field in the near future. With that, I hand over to Mark Williams, and you'll certainly start to hear a bit more about what you can do as individuals to start preparing for the season. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Vince, and good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for having us along this afternoon in this very important briefing. Obviously, with the COVID restrictions that are affecting us all, this is probably the easiest and best format to get this message out as wide as possible throughout all of our community. From what Stephen's just mentioned, and also that short video presentation, you can see how our operations centre runs in Nowra here, and that covers all of the Shoalhaven district. A little bit of history for the Rural Fire Service locally. We look after the Shoalhaven local government area out of here. We have 36 brigades within the district, on an average of about 1,500 members, all volunteers throughout each of those 36 brigades. And they're supported in here with some full-time staff which coordinate with each of the brigades and assist them in managing day-to-day responses, whether it be something as significant as the Currawan fire or our day-to-day operations, which is everything from a garbage bin alight to a motor vehicle accident or a structure fire. In effect, those 1,500 volunteers are the Rural Fire Service. They are all members of our community, and we enjoy the support that we get from people like yourselves around the community who do also participate in activities, but also can do a lot for yourselves to prepare yourselves for the seasons as we go forward. So a few things just to quickly run through. Obviously, our fire season is fast approaching us again in Shoalhaven. It does start on the 1st of September this year, as it does every year. We've had a wetter than normal start and winter period, which is great as far as we can see. We have full soil moisture around the area, a lot of standing water, and obviously those wet weather events have actually caused us other issues. But as far as the bushfire season, it is a great start for us. We're going to capitalise on that, however, and continue to encourage everybody to prepare for when that weather does turn, and it will turn, as we've seen over the history. And we need everybody to have their preparations in place. So I'll get a bit more into that shortly. During a fire, such as the Carawan fire, major emergencies, the Rural Fire Service does everything we possibly can, not only to combat the fire itself, but also to inform the community about what's going on and the warning processes that we have in place to allow people to remain situationally aware, so you know where the fires are around you. So apps such as the Fires Near Me app, we have social media that we manage locally for our own Facebook pages and Twitter accounts, but we also have the formal warnings, the advice levels that the fires go through, being there is an advice, so you'll get advice that there is a bushfire or an incident in your area. It'll then move up the scale as the situation develops or worsens, and you'll go to watch and act. And what that watch and act means is it's time to start paying attention to that incident, start knowing where it is, and start thinking about what you are going to do if the situation worsens or if that fire is in very close proximity to you. And then ultimately, we can go into emergency warning status. And in that emergency warning status, that is exactly what we need people to pay attention to. People have to have their preparations in place and need to act on those plans that they've already been working to. Associated with emergency warnings, sometimes, not every time, there'll be an emergency alert. Those emergency alerts are put out not only through our social media and those other avenues such as Fires Near Me, but we have the capability to send it out via telecommunications efforts, pager messages, phone calls to residential house lines and the likes of that. What is really important out of all of these things? There isn't just one avenue of the warning system. What we encourage everybody to do and implore on everybody to do is not rely on one particular form of warning. What you also need to do in conjunction with having your plan properly prepared is monitor multiple areas for those warnings, as well as looking out your front door and having a look at what's around you and the conditions on the day. So what can you do to benefit yourself and your family, and ultimately ourselves as emergency services, is to have your bushfire survival plan. These things are available either through the Fire Control Centre, through your local rural fire brigade, or you can download them online at the RFS website. They are free, and we encourage every resident to have one of these in place. And it's not only important for your own place, but also important if you're going to visit an area, such as the many tourists that come into our area. We implore that people have those available so that you can actually have those plans in place. Those plans go into everything. It's not only what you are going to do during an incident, but it's what you're going to do in relation to the rest of your family members. What are you going to do with animals? What are you going to do and where are you going to go? And what is also important is making sure you have an ulterior option should your first initial plan not come to fruition because of the emergency itself developing beyond your needs. Things that you can also do yourself is have your property prepared. A well-prepared property is a good place for people to stay, in effect, and protect yourself should you get to that point. One of the things we'll often talk about is for people that are staying and defending to enact their plan, whilst other times we'll tell people to get out if they're not properly prepared and leave early. If you are going to stay and defend, it is imperative that you are properly prepared. It's imperative that your place is properly prepared. Removal of vegetation around your house, clearing of gutters, having water available, having other services available, making sure you've got a transistor radio or a car or another form of means to charge your mobile phone so you can still get those alerts coming through. But it is also imperative if you're going to leave, you leave early. And why early? That means days in advance if that is the case with something as serious as what we've seen previously. Again, back on to staying and defending. If you're going to stay and defend, you need to be prepared, and you need to be prepared and think outside the box and understand that things such as power and water could and may go down. And what are you going to do to prepare yourself? It is not just a simple case of being physically able, but it is the mental stress and the trauma that many people have to go through, such as a serious event as some of these fires have been. Leading into our fire season, the local district is well prepared. As I said, with our brigades, they're all ready for the next season, albeit that hopefully we're going to have a much slower start and hopefully might not actually see a fire season at all generate locally. Added to that, a lot of our brigades are going to have a get ready weekend. We'll be having open days in some locations where COVID conditions permit. In other areas, brigades will be doing stuff online. So I ask everybody, if you're in the local area, touch base with your local RFS brigade. Go down and see them when they're open on the weekend or during the weekday. If you find that you can't get in contact with them, contact through council or through the Fire Control Centre here, and we'll put you in touch with your local brigade. And if you want to continue to help yourselves and help the rest of your community, the RFS is always open for new memberships. And it's not just firefighters we need. We need communications people, we need welfare assistants, we need transport people, you name it. If you've got the time, we've got the job for you. So please avail yourselves of preparing yourselves for this fire season and future fire seasons, and don't hesitate to reach out if you need assistance. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Mark. All very, very helpful and useful information, and we're going to continue on this theme now, and we're going from the big, slowly zeroing down to the very specific of how we can prepare. Along this route, probably the most important person to hear from in terms of the organisational and how the emergencies are played out and led is the local area emergency operations controller, and that's Inspector Ray Steins from the New South Wales Police. Over to you, please, Ray.
Thanks, Vince. My name's Ray Steins. I'm the inspector in charge of Nowra Police Station. I also do the LEACON, or the Local Emergency Operations Controller role, along with Inspector Dave Cochran, another inspector at Nowra. We're appointed as LEACONs by our region commander, and it's a legislated position that has to be implemented. The role that I've got is to basically coordinate everything else around the emergency apart from the actual combating the emergency. So with the Caravan fire, Mark was the incident controller. He looked after combating the fire. Whereas mine and Dave's role, we were to coordinate everything else in relation to that fire. So that meant anything in relation to evacuation centres, to roadblocks, making sure that asset protection zones were looked after, and all the functional areas that were mentioned by Steve earlier were up to speed with their requirements in relation to that. I mentioned the word coordination. That is probably the most important thing that I am in charge of. It's coordination of a lot of resources, a lot of agencies to make sure we get a desired outcome and to assist the combat agency. Doesn't matter what the emergency is, there's a variety of resources at our disposal, a large number of assets and resources, but unfortunately it's not an infinite number of resources. So for me to be activated, or for me to activate the EOC, it's a matter of receiving a phone call from the incident controller. And if I use the Caravan fire as an example, on the 26th of November, Mark rang me on my way back from Sydney and said, basically, we've got a fire and it's running like the clappers, and that's a quote. And it was true. So he rang me, asked me to activate the EOC to a certain degree in relation to several agencies and areas that he needed support in. We did that straight away, and it went to, there's a number of variety of levels that I'll get to, and it just went from there, and we stayed operational basically for the next 72 days. Our operational status, there's white, green, yellow and red. White is just stand down as it is at the moment, and green is to just sort of, for want of a better phrase, hurry up and wait. Yellow is we've got resources in the field, and then red, it's all hands on deck. We were at red for quite a lengthy period of time during the Currawin fire. And the only person that can activate the EAC is myself or Dave. So we're the if the combat agency needs our help, we will ring the LEMO, Kim White, and then she will just basically press the button to activate all the agencies, and we all meet here at the Integrated Emergency Management Centre in the EAC. In relation to the EAC itself, it's, as far as I'm concerned, and we were identified as an area of better practice throughout the Currawin fire and throughout all the fire emergencies throughout the state. Our community engagement throughout the emergency, with the meetings that we held at the various locations, and that is paramount in relation to not just informing the community of where the fire is at in this instance, but also to reinforce the preparation of their plans. And just to reinforce what Mark said, the plans that the community make or for themselves, for each residence, which should be, has to go down to the minute detail. So if you think that you're physically ready and mentally ready, but you need something like you're on medication, and this an emergency can go for a number of days or a number of weeks, and you're going to be isolated and you're happy to stay, you have to make sure that part of your plan is that you have the medication there to keep you going that you need. It's got to be down to that minute detail. Just quickly, the police role in relation to emergencies will always be, as it always is, to protect life and property. All right, to do that, we may have to block off roads, we may have to evacuate people, we may, and we may have to relocate them. We're happy to do that if we have to. All right, but like I said, our primary role, and it will always be, is to protect life and property. I think that's about it, Vince, unless anyone's got any specific questions.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Ray. We'll hold questions for a moment. We're just going to hear from the last panelist to speak before we go into questions, and we've got a good stream of questions that have come in. Is to listen to the Regional Emergency Management Officer, who will now bring us down to a fine point. So what are the things that we can be doing as individuals and in responding to the emergency? And there's been a couple already mentioned, like have enough supplies of routine medications, make sure you prepare your home and the surrounds, be ready to have a plan with an alternative plan, know where you're going to go. But we're going to bring all that to a head now before we go into the questions. And with that, I'll invite the Regional Emergency Management Officer, Warren Goodall, who was, again, in the EOC throughout the last emergency, from more than dawn till dusk, but most of his waking days. Over to you, Warren.
Thanks, Vince, and good afternoon, everybody. As Vince said, my name is Warren Goodall. I'm the Regional Emergency Management Officer for the Illawarra South Coast, and I help support the local councils from Wollongong down to the Victorian border. I'm a civilian employee with New South Wales Police, and my functional role is to provide advice and guidance to a whole range of organisations, including local government, on emergency management functionality. As Vince has indicated, it was pretty busy during the fire season, with a fair number of hours put in by myself and certainly by my local council coordinators, the local emergency management officers, who have a very integral part of the emergency management process within council. They are, and you've got Kim White in the Shoalhaven, a particularly good employee who is very dedicated to the role, and her role is to provide that office management to the EOC to make sure it functions and supports the LEACON and the combat agency as best it can. So what can you do during an emergency to prepare yourself? First and foremost, the situational awareness is an important part of being ready for things. Whilst we have a lot of plans that rely on agencies doing certain things to support the community, it does boil down to what Mark was saying earlier on. What can you do to prepare yourself? And we call that situational awareness. We know that different emergencies affect different people in different ways. What might impact on you may be very different from your neighbour or from the person down the road. You know your personal circumstances better than anybody else, and it is imperative that you are prepared to meet the emergency and be aware of what's going on around you as best you can. There are a number of devices and apps that can be downloaded free of charge. Some are government-based and some are private corporation-based. Things, for example, like the Emergency Plus app that can help you in any sort of emergency. It tells people where you are and allows you to contact 000 fairly quickly through your smart device. There's applications like Fires Near Me, which is run by New South Wales Rural Fire Service, and it gives you reasonably up-to-date information on the conditions of the fires. And certainly the recent inquiry has suggested some further additions to that process, which hopefully won't be too far away. There is a Flood Safe app. There's live traffic applications that you can look at to see what is happening on the road situations around you. The live traffic is only focusing on state government roads. During high level emergencies, it may well show some local roads, but your best source of information for local road information is your local council website. There are a whole range of these apps that can assist you in preparing and being ready for the various types of emergencies. But as has been alluded to before, it's about what you know is your capability to respond to certain situations. Our friend in all this is ABC. ABC is a designated national emergency broadcaster. They have permission from all the jurisdictions in Australia, from local council up to federal government, to assist in the delivery of emergency information. So if nothing else, if you don't have a smartphone, if nothing else, if you can get a battery operated radio, the old transistor radio that we used to have when we were a lot younger, if you can get one of them, tune it into your local ABC. For us in the Illawarra and Shoalhaven, it's 97.3. They will keep you up to date with all the emergency information you need. They are an integral part of our communication system, and any advice they give comes from the proper authorities, whether it be the combat agency, for example, the Rural Fire Service or the State Emergency Service, or whether it comes from New South Wales Police or local government. That's about it from me for now.
Okay. Thanks very much, Warren. So just in that few moments, I noted down a few things in the last minutes of what a good a kit bag might look like for you to throw in the car ready to go. One will be a mobile phone charger that isn't one that relies on 240 volts and a wall plug. Something you can plug into your car, either a USB port or a cigarette lighter. A good transistor radio with the old 9-volt battery or something, and just have that ready to go and tuned to 97.3. Perhaps a torch. Have cash. Have a standby of cash in your wallet, because one of the things we do know that went down in recent times was the ATM machines, because as power went, so too did the ability to perhaps draw out money. So have a little bit of extra cash tucked into your wallet, ready to go. Be ready with enough medications. If you're on medications, make sure you've got a good enough supply to last you a week or two. And in all of that, if you need some sort of more focused guidance on where to look, I remind folks that the emergency helpline in council, or the Shoalhaven Council helpline, is still active and will be for the duration, and that's number 4429 5888. Now, having said that, we've got a few questions here, and I think probably the best person to answer the first two that I'll pose is Warren Goodall in his capacity as the Regional Emergency Management Officer. And I'll ask both questions at once. The first is, how will evacuation centres be managed with the COVID situation in force? And that's a terrific question, because it goes to the point, and I'll let Warren elaborate, but it goes to the point of when asked to leave or advised to leave, it's probably a better place to be leaving and getting somewhere else other than necessarily going into group with other people, if you can avoid it. So there's that. And the second question is, just wondering what the plans to advise emergency updates to local community radio stations within the local government area, and in the case of alerting the community. So there's two questions: how do we manage COVID and the evacuation, Warren? And secondly, how do we update local radios?
Thanks, Vince. Two good questions there. So the first one, the evacuation centres. Evacuation centres are an integral part of our process, and certainly COVID has introduced some challenges that we had that are interesting for us to work through. The state government announced back in about 2 months ago now some changes to the evacuation centre process, and within the local Illawarra Shoalhaven area we've implemented some practical interpretations of that, so it works reasonably well. First and foremost, we are reluctant to open up an evacuation centre because of the COVID environment. Part of the evacuations process is that we want people to remain safe, so sending to an area that is full of people who may or may not be sick seems counterproductive in that. So our first call at this stage is to advise people to go to family and friends that they know are healthy themselves, and take support from those family and friends. If that's not possible, for whatever reason, we're establishing a series of phone numbers which will be broadcasted at the time of the emergency and allow people to register and then be provided with assistance for emergency accommodation. Now, we used that same principle during the recent floods, and it worked reasonably well. No system is perfect, but we do the best we can to support the evacuation processes, accepting that COVID is a particular challenge at the moment. Now, I didn't quite get the second question, Vince, but if I'm correct, it was about how do we get information to ABC radio? Is that the gist of the conversation?
And local community radio stations.
Sure. So we have, normally we put ABC radio either into the EOC, the Emergency Operations Centre, or we had them on speed dial, and through the combat agency, so during the fires or floods it would be RFS or SES, and through the Emergency Operations Centre, we have a direct line to the various media channels. So not just while we focus on ABC, we have that same communication go to all the media channels to give that information as quickly as we can. In most cases, we can get it to them literally within a few minutes of the decision being made. They can be broadcasting that information. The reason we focus on ABC is that they have an obligation to quote word for word exactly what we send them at the time we send it to them. We don't have that same luxury with the commercial TV stations and radio stations who may slot it in at the next convenient spot. Now, more often than not, they do the right thing by us, but we have a guaranteed assurance from ABC that they will broadcast that information when we require it to be broadcast. And it is sent to them as quickly as possible, as soon as possible after the decision has been made. I hope that answers the question.
I think that does. The important underlying thread of that is that there are some authoritative sources of information. The ABC radio is certainly one. The Fires Near Me app. The next question relates to that, and it's probably a good segue. The question here is, and I think it's probably either to Mark or to Warren, and I'll let you both toss a coin, but Fires Near Me app wasn't functional during 2019-20 fires. ABC radio was great, and the 3 emergency warning levels have proven to be ambiguous and hard to decipher in the heat of the moment. People need simple thinking plans, not written plans, that guide actions during an emergency situation. So who would like to take that?
I guess I can probably initially, and Warren can wrap up anything that I happen to miss, if that's okay. Yeah, so I'll take that one initially, and Warren can catch up if need be, anything I happen to miss out. In general, yes, I agree. ABC Radio did an outstanding job. We were in direct communications with them very, very regularly on speed dial on my own phone as the incident controller, as well as broadcasting a lot of our messages out. Contrary to popular belief, Fires Near Me was working. A lot of the time issues that people saw with Fires Near Me was either the telecommunications issues where a local tower may have gone down and people's connectivity to the app may have suffered as a result, or in some cases the effect that a lot of the information that we put on Fires Near Me has to go through a chain of hands before it gets publicised. Now, one of the things we're going to continue to work on in the future is to further improve that. But at the moment, the mapping on a Fires Near Me app, that mapping data has to come into the Emergency Control Centre here. We have to ratify that and we have to upload it into a mapping software format, which is then portrayed on Fires Near Me. So as that information comes in, as we decipher that information, and as we get to put that information in, and we have dedicated officers constantly working on that, it does take some time for those updates to go through. It is a human interaction process. It is not just automatic, and it takes some time to do. But Fires Near Me is certainly a huge benefit tool that we've seen been put in place over the last 10 or 15 years. It is a great level of information to the general public out there. But as I mentioned before, it shouldn't be relied on as the only source of truth. Relying on other things as well, such as ABC Radio, our social media pages, the RFS website, and other activities that you'll see going around is the best way for people to stay situationally aware.
Warren, anything to add to that?
Thanks, Vince. Just to add to what Mark's just said, whilst all this technology is really great for giving us situational awareness, community members need to understand that if we lose communication towers, we lose information, and they will lose information as well. If you know that you are in a particular area that's, for example, a poor reception area for your iPhone connectivity, whatever it might be, or that you have poor radio reception in that area from the radio stations, you need to build that into your personal plan to allow you to recognise that. So if you understand that things could go bad and you're going to be impacted by loss of telecommunications infrastructure, because that normally happens in your area anyway, you need to have that as part of your plan to allow you to make more informed decisions.
Thanks, Warren. The next question, I think we'll again go to Mark. Are there additional aerial resources available this coming fire season?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Vince. Just to wrap that last question up, I failed to mention the very end part was in relation to the confusion revolving around the warning levels. As I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion today, part of the bushfire survival plan is becoming aware and knowing those 3 alert levels. So the advice, the watch and act, and the emergency warning, and knowing the differences for them. So again, that's part of your preparations as individuals, is to learn what those are and understand what you're going to do at each one of those steps along the way. Plans themselves, the more detailed, the better. But at the very, very least, have that discussion amongst your family about what you are going to do and where you're going to go to, and what you're going to take is a better plan than not having anything at all. More detail, the better. But don't make them too over the top, because you won't remember at the heat of the time. Moving on to the question about aerial resources, yes, the answer is yes. The Rural Fire Service, the New South Wales State Government recently, and we had it in place for last year, has purchased a 737 large air tanker, which we used very regularly during the Curraween fire. This year, during the off-season, we've seen an increase just recently as last week, and another what they call a 412 helicopter, which is a medium-sized bucket machine that is allowing us to additionally attack fires early in the piece, has been secured through the sponsorship of Goodman. $5.5 million has bought that airframe, and the RFS will be equipping that with strategic equipment and personnel to be able to attack fires and get into remote locations early. And then as a fire develops, if a fire continues to develop, that aircraft can continue to bucket as well. Additionally, there'll be another 2 aircraft coming into the Rural Fire Service fleet over the next period of time, increasing our fleet substantially, but also increasing in that is we're constantly monitoring and trying to work on further development of additional resources coming out of the Northern Hemisphere on a contract basis and availability to us. What we saw last fire season, I hate using the word unprecedented, but it was. We saw a vast proportion of New South Wales alight at the time, and it stretched every single resource, not just aviation, but all of our firefighters throughout the state, and for that matter, all of Australia.
Thanks, Mark. We've got a question regarding livestock. Perhaps again, either Remo or Limo is well placed here. Are evacuation centres for livestock still going to be offered?
Thanks, Vince. Another good question. Certainly, when we decide about evacuations and we start planning for evacuations, we do consider the our local pets, our little cats and dogs and so forth, as well as livestock in the area. Now, it is not possible to evacuate every bit of livestock and every bit of cattle and so on from a community area, and most farmers understand and appreciate that. But where we have small numbers of livestock, for example, you might have 1 or 2 horses as part of a family, just a large pet, so to say, we do make accommodation for that. Now, we do that in conjunction with local council, and we utilise resources that council own, and they may well be, for example, your local showground. Now, the downside to that is there is some requirement for the pet owner to move that animal themselves. We can't guarantee that we're going to be able to move those animals for you, and there's some reliance on you being resilient enough to manage that process. But once we get you to, or once you get to the large animal evacuation centre, whether it be in Berry, whether it be in Milton, or it doesn't matter where it might be, and sometimes we use facilities that are outside the local government area, depending on what's safest for the environment, and we will then provide some level of support to you in that environment. We will assist with, through our local land services partners, we will assist with food and water for those animals, and even, in where necessary, some assistance with veterinary checks and so forth. But we do have it as part of our plan, and it's a very important part of our planning system.
Thanks, Warren. One of the there's a great question here, which I think actually deserves a little bit more thought and a bit consideration, but it reads, and I just put all of us on notice here, because we need to perhaps include some information in this in the Shoalhaven City Council website. And the question is, in Berry in 2019-2020 fire disasters, the community rallied together to register Office of Emergency private accommodation and then match people needing it. It was fantastic. What information support could be given to potential accommodation providers around COVID safety to support such offers again, especially if evacuation centres aren't going to be operational? I think that's actually a really good question to sit with a whiteboard and work out consequential management of what the risk is, not only to the person being evacuated or finding somewhere else to be, but in particular the person offering out of the kindness and goodness of their heart their own home to accommodate. So, if anybody's got any initial thoughts on that, please chime in now. But otherwise, I'd like to take that one on notice and feed it out to the person who asked the question, and more broadly on the Shoalhaven City Council's website.
Can I stick my hand up there, Vince, for this one, just to share experience rather than offer really sage advice? That shared experience was, of course, that during the evacuation of many people in the Shoalhaven, the offers of private accommodation can't be dealt with by government agencies. Government agencies don't want to take the risk of matching people up with private providers. It's not in the remit. The government agencies wanted to put people into paid accommodation, which of course comes in with that, the cleaning regime of paid accommodation. So in the respect of us taking responsibility for evacuations for family and friends, or opening our doors to strangers, I think that if we, look online and look at the things that Shoalhaven City Council are offering to businesses around COVID safety, and we allow householders to apply those same kind of regimes to their place during an evacuation, if they're taking in strangers, then that would be a great starting point for people to deal with, not knowing what was happening. And obviously then if people were coming from outside